Last time we finished up our science production on Fulgora, and it's time to set our eyes on a new horizon. This time we're headed for Gleb. At least I think that's how it's pronounced. Actually, they mentioned the name in the trailer.
Gleb.
Yeah, Gleb is good enough for me. I'm not going to stop to put on an extremely relaxed British accent every time I say Gleb. This is probably the planet I knew the least about before I started. No doubt because unlike the other planets, it doesn't make intuitive sense. I mean, just look at for example Fulgora. It's full of trash, you recycle trash, you make stuff from the recycled trash. I mean, that just makes sense. I'm not going to talk about
Volcanus.
But that planet also just makes intuitive sense to me. Now, Gleb is apparently a planet where you can only mine rocks and you grow trees. It makes no sense. My very limited knowledge of the planet also includes some tidbits like it's inhabited, and that the core mechanic of the planet is spoilage, making the crafting process time sensitive. And the science packs on this planet can also spoil, so we need a separate platform that's fast and self-sufficient to get items back quickly. So the first thing I'm going to do is a quick copy-paste to double my rocket silos. This was of course to get things ready for my departure quicker. This was ultimately pointless considering I immediately forgot everything about it, and instead spent over an hour making a production line that makes high quality iron and steel plates. In the interest of time, here's a quick list of the things I did before leaving for Gleb. First I upgraded equipment in my armor. Ooh. Especially make note of the high quality night vision goggles, which are in no way affected by quality.
My eyes, the goggles do nothing.
I noticed that the railroad tracks in this outpost looked very suspicious. Set up some extra mining so I wouldn't run out while I was on another planet. Get reminded that Fulgora is still a planet. Made some maintenance tanks to repair the walls while I was gone. Doubled my power production. Babysit Fulgora some more. This part is actually a bit interesting. I'm setting up some circuitry that keeps track of and remembers every single solar panel and accumulator that leaves the planet. There's another circuit that's going to keep track of how many solar panels and accumulators are built on the planet. But that circuit knows how many have been built based on how many have gone missing. So when a solar panel, for example, goes missing from the logistics network but shows up in the rocket silo, it's not counted as built. The reason why I'm going through all of this effort is because there's an optimal ratio between accumulators and solar panels, and hitting that ratio gets annoying when you have different qualities. I don't really want to keep track of that, so I made a circuit that keeps track of it for me. The lights you see here tells me what the balance is. If there's lights on the left, there's too many solar panels, if there's lights on the right, there's too many accumulators. It doesn't get the count completely right, but it's close enough. And now, I finally stopped procrastinating and started sending up the items I think I might need on Gleb. Now I'm just about ready to go to Gleb. I just need to make a quick stop at Fulgora to pick up some ammo for my taser. While we're traveling now, I would like to take a few moments to tell a short story and play some Pokemon. Almost 10 years ago now, in April 2015, I built myself a computer. I had to change the GPU 2 years ago, but outside of that, it's still the exact same computer. But while I was finishing up my last video, my motherboard learned a new move. My motherboard's demise wasn't overly dramatic, nor was it very sudden. It just started out with some random crashing with no rhyme or reason. For example, I could start my computer and then try to start Steam and then it would crash, but not always. And while trying to figure out what was causing the crashes, I would try lots of different things. Like for example having it run a moderately taxing program all night, and when I woke up, there it was working away, until I touched the mouse and then it crashed. Now I had to do a lot of testing because replacing the RAM would be cheap. It's still possible to buy DDR4 RAM that fits my motherboard. On the other hand, buying a CPU that fits my motherboard or a motherboard that fits my CPU is a lot more annoying. After testing my RAM sticks, I found an error on one of them. This wasn't very helpful since I'd gotten a crash while running just one RAM stick with all 4 of them. And to make this already pretty long story a bit shorter, I ended up going with the expensive option of just buying a new motherboard, CPU and RAM. This whole process ended up taking me almost 2 weeks. There's a lot of reasons for why it ended up taking so long. But one of the most annoying reasons is that the CPU I ordered, which was said to be in stock the next day, was in fact not in stock and wouldn't be in stock for another month. I'd done a bit of research and all of the CPUs that would fit my needs were not in stock. Well, how do I fix this problem? Well, the repair is already expensive, why not make it a bit more expensive? I ended up just buying another CPU that's cheap and using that one while I'm waiting for a good one. And to be fair, these days the bottom of the line CPUs are probably better than my old i7. It seems like we reached Gleb now. I guess that means I have to stop making excuses why I spend so long editing these videos. For now. Trust me, I have a lot of excuses. I'm going to give you a quick montage of me setting out the basics on this planet. Are those exploding mushrooms? Yes, they are. As it turns out, I have no idea what I'm doing here. There's a few reasons why I'm struggling here. The first reason is that, unsurprisingly, combining chronic fatigue with having 2 kids at Christmas time with lots of snow and no daycare may actually lead to almost 3 weeks of exhaustion and brain fog. And the second reason, which is that Gleb does his production lines a bit different. A bit different, which means that I actually had to use my brain, which I didn't have at the time. When I say production lines, I mean more so the lines than the production. You see, the main mechanic of Gleb is spoilage. This means that almost everything comes through the timer, and when the timer runs out, it turns into something else. Usually, it turns into spoilage, but there are exceptions. A few of the items have very generous spoilage windows, but some of the most important ones don't, and will spoil in less than 5 minutes. So moving the products from station to station quickly is imperative. In these early stages, if you don't want to produce unnecessary amounts of rot, you should probably plan out your first steps. According to the tech tree, your first goal should be to make bioflux. The recipe for making bioflux is actually very simple, but there might be someone who doesn't actually play Factorio, so I'll give you a flowchart to better visualize. It all starts with the agricultural tower. It makes Yumako and it makes jelly nut. For the most part, you're going to be restricted in where you can build the agricultural tower. Jelly nut can only be grown in these dark purple areas, and Yumako can only be grown in these yellowish green areas. Once these agricultural towers are set up, they will plant and harvest on their own. However, do keep in mind that if you produce more than you need, it will affect freshness down the line. And also, when you harvest, it produces spores. To put it very simply, spores is basically Gleb's version of pollution. That is to say that it causes the enemies to produce more units and attack you. It will also contribute to them making strong units over time. These tiny ones I encounter now just after landing actually cannot hurt me. Killing him when he's actually harmless kinda feels wrong. Jesus Christ, he's got a gun! But I like to think that while the biters are getting angry from the pollution, the Pentapods are a different story.
There's something different in the air. The sweet stench. Just marvelous. Oh, it sings to me. You sick creature.
After harvesting your crops, you can turn them into mash and jelly, and then into bioflux. As you can see, jelly can also be turned into lubricant for making belts and such, and the mash can also be turned into nutrients, which goes into the biochamber. We haven't talked about that yet, so let's do that now. The biochamber has the same productivity bonus and crafting speed as the electromagnetic plant. I went over that in the previous episode, so you can go back and watch that if you're interested. I'll put a link to the playlist in the description. You may have noticed that I labeled the nutrients specifically as fuel for the biochamber. Biochambers will not work at all without any nutrients. This creates an interesting scenario. You want to produce the nutrients with the biochambers, but you need nutrients to start the production. This wouldn't be a problem if not for spoilage. Nutrients will spoil in just 4 minutes. This means that if your production line gets held up for a few minutes, everything will spoil and everything will lock up. My advice would be, don't bother trying to design a production line where nothing spoils, and instead design your production line as if everything will spoil at every step of the way. You'll have a much easier time handling the spoilage than avoiding it. Speaking of handling spoilage, let's talk about the heating towers. Here's a pretty normal setup for a heating tower. Its function is very simple. You put burnable stuff in it and it burns it. And it does it very quickly. And it stores the energy as heat. You can then transfer the heat into these heat exchangers, which boils water. You may have noticed that it functions exactly like a nuclear reactor. The only difference being that it doesn't get a productivity bonus for being placed next to other heating towers, and of course the fuel that it burns. If we stop supplying the heat exchangers with water, we'll soon see another useful feature. When it reaches the maximum temperature of 1000 degrees, it doesn't stop burning things. While this is technically wasted energy, it does still remove your waste. So if you want to get rid of spoilage somewhere where you can't fit all the turbines and heat exchangers, you can just place a heating tower to burn it. Now let's go back and talk about the problem of biochambers getting stuck when the nutrients rot. This is a build I like to put at the start of my production lines using biochambers. It's essentially a primer that uses a bit of spoilage to get the production going. It's currently turned off because of this constant combinator. I'll turn it on once I finish explaining. This assembler is using a recipe that can produce nutrients from spoilage very inefficiently. These two chests are requesting a small stockpile of spoilage for usage later. Note that the assembler is only set to work if the number of nutrients are less than 3. Using these green wires, I've connected assembling machines to the biochambers and reading their fuel. These two inserters also check the fuel level, and if the nutrient level is 0, it inserts a nutrient. Let's see what happens when I start it. It reads that the biochambers have 0 nutrients, so it starts producing. Then the inserters put in 1 nutrient if the nutrient level is 0. Once both the biochambers have nutrients, they can start exchanging nutrients and materials to make nutrients to keep themselves going. And while they're working, their nutrient levels will be high enough to stop the assembling machine from working. You may have noticed a bunch of extra inserters I haven't talked about. I'll talk about them now in this segment called "You'll forget to do this and it will be very annoying." Take a look at this. Do you see a problem here? Outside of it being very messy. What I have done here is remove a very small part that's related to the "assume that everything is going to spoil" mantra. My point here is that you're going to need a lot of different inserters with a lot of different filters. And if you look closely, I've actually done a mistake of not setting a filter on the green inserter here. And all the other inserters I didn't talk about are just about handling spoilage. My advice is that whenever you have a belt with spoilable items on it, always put an inserter with a spoilage filter and an active provider chest. If you do that, you can technically just let the spoilage go onto the belt with everything else. But an even safer solution would be to filter every output and have a separate output for spoilage. Most of the time, that won't be necessary, unless you're using stack inserters, but we haven't gotten that far yet. And now, we should have all the knowledge we need to make a production line for bioflux. Alright, let me just make a note here. We'll come back to this clusterfuck later. We have finally made bioflux. From here on out, almost everything we're going to make needs bioflux. And it will serve as the solution to a problem I've barely mentioned so far, namely copper and iron. The only way of acquiring these metals natively on Gleb is these bacteria that spoil into their respective ores. On the flowchart, you may have seen that I'm already capable of producing these. There's just one problem. These recipes, they suck. The recipes are incredibly inefficient, giving your copper bacteria, for example, only 10% of the time. The same with the iron bacteria, but you will see the worst part of the recipe is that they give you spoilage every single time. If you wanted to make iron bacteria in a biochamber, you would get one every 3 seconds together with 36 spoilage. While I'm sure you can find some way to handle spoilage, the return on investment is very low and you're restricted in how much jelly nut and Yumako you can make. But now we have bioflux and a much better option of cultivating the bacteria. I haven't done the calculations, so I'm not entirely sure, but it's probably at least 10 times as efficient. You're going to need some fresh bacteria to get the process started, of course, so the old recipe might still be useful. It's probably a bit hard to tell what's going on here, so let me give you a quick overview. We start with the requester chest down here. It acts as a primer by checking the contents of the biochamber and the chest, and if it sees that there are no bacteria present, it requests a few. The bacteria will then get moved up to the green buffer chest, which is where most of them will spoil into ore. The inserter in the middle is specifically chosen to be a yellow inserter for its slowness. It is constantly grabbing a few of the freshest bacteria from the buffer chest and moving them over to the iron chest, where it gets circulated back into the production. And finally, as the bacteria spoil in these two chests, they get moved over to the belt and sent to smelting. Now I just mirrored the design and we have copper and iron. I have some biochambers ready to produce bacteria using the old recipe, just in case we ever run out. They check the contents of the logistic network, and if we have too few bacteria, they start producing. Now that I have access to the basic resources, I can start producing things natively. Until now, I've just been importing things as I run out. But now, I finally have access to all the belts and inserters I'll ever need. Now I have to get the rocket tiles running. On Volgora, I start producing science packs before making any rocket tiles. But the science packs on this plant will just spoil, so there's really no point. Just making the silos, of course, isn't going to get anything off the plant, we also need to make the rockets themselves. Conveniently, when we start producing bioflux, we also got access to everything we need to make the rockets. To make rockets, we need low-density structures, processing units, and rocket fuel. And rocket fuel, very simple, just bioflux and jelly, and you have rocket fuel. Since Gleb has no access to oil, we were previously missing both plastic and sulfur to make processing units. But we can now make plastic using Yumako Mash and bioflux and spoilage to make sulfur. Thanks to the copper and iron we can now produce and the plastic bars, we can also make low-density structures. You may have noticed that these recipes have something in common, and that's that they're all oil derivatives. And that's of course because Gleb has no oil. But it doesn't actually have to stay that way. If you already had the researchers from Vulcanus and some of the researchers from Gleb, you can start to synthesize your own oil. Using the Gleb research, you can synthesize coal, and with the Vulcanus research, you can liquefy the coal into oils. Now, as long as you have coal production, you just have to supply a single barrel of heavy oil to get it started, and you should be able to do oil refining just like you do with Navis. If you're wondering how I had this technology without going to Vulcanus, it's because I used the console to give me the research so I could actually test it and get some footage. It's important to actually test these things, since God knows I've had brilliant ideas before, only to find out it's restricted to certain planets. I'm not saying that this is something you should do, just that it's something you can do. I haven't really played far enough to tell if this is something that's actually useful. Either way, going back to the playthrough, I haven't actually got any of these researches yet. What you're seeing here is my inevitable, very messy test setup, which of course stays as my primary production for way too long because I can't be bothered to make something new once it's actually working. It's a real clusterfuck, but at least I learned something. The rocket fuel we can produce now is pretty great for covering our increased energy needs. But of course, burning it when the heating tower is at 1000 degrees is incredibly wasteful. You can easily avoid that by having the inserter read the temperature of the heating tower and only inserting if the temperature is low enough. While working on all these new recipes, I was quickly reminded of the negatives of my newfound success. If the pentapods are pestering you but you can't see their nests, try turning on the pollution overlay and look for these flashing squares. That will tell you that there's a nest there without having to wait for the radar to find it. At this point, you basically have to find a few nests anyway because of the next step. We reached the point where we can get the science packs off Gleb and back to our home planet, and the recipe is incredibly simple, just 2 items that we can easily get our hands on. The first ingredient is bioflux, and the second ingredient, which is the whole reason why making these science packs is so annoying, is pentapod eggs. And I'm going to guess that you probably already understand why this would be annoying. Now's a pretty good time to remove this post-it note because it's finally time to talk about biochamber pollution. And that's because biochambers also need pentapod eggs. To avoid situations like that, I've unsurprisingly devised a system that's a bit more complicated than it actually needs to be. It's all based around this requester chest. It requests everything we need to make a biochamber. However, it's not requesting at the moment because it's only set to request if there's actually a pentapod egg. You can see that it's set to read the contents of the chest and enable only if pentapod eggs is not equal to 0. This of course doesn't work because it can't request pentapod eggs if it doesn't already have pentapod eggs. So the chest is also connected to the robo port so it can check the logistic network if there's a pentapod egg there. And then it also checks the biochamber to see if there's any pentapod eggs there. So if there's any eggs in any of those locations, it starts requesting. There's really only one reason why I decided to do this, and it's because of nutrients. I'm going to get rid of these eggs I have so you can see the chest working. So the whole point is that I don't really want the chest to get filled with nutrients when there's nothing for the nutrients to do, it just makes more spoilage. I just realized that the eggs probably got delivered to the wrong location. But still, if you look at the requester chest, you can see the moment where it gets put in storage and then taken out. This time I'm just going to put an egg directly in the chest and pretend like it got delivered. This time you can see the chest stays active until it's used up all the eggs. Now I'm going to leave you with one last really good tip. Don't do this. You can easily avoid excess spoilage by just putting it near a belt that's already carrying nutrients, and then request everything except nutrients. And then have an inserter just check if there's any pentapod eggs in the biochamber, and if there is, insert nutrients. When looking back at things I built long ago, I'm often mystified by what I was thinking. I'm pretty sure that the whole system with requester chest is a solution I came up with before I actually had the belt with nutrients. I've kind of forgotten what the whole point I was trying to make here was. Most likely it was about having a bunch of biochambers ready to produce biochambers without creating excess spoilage. Because you need a bunch of biochambers producing biochambers to make all the biochambers before the eggs hatch. Most likely. Until now, I've just been making biochambers by harvesting eggs off the ground after destroying the nests. This works fine since there's a limited number of biochambers you actually need. But when making science packs, the number of eggs you need is theoretically infinite. So it's time to start breeding them. This is a very simple recipe where you just put water, eggs and nutrients in the biochamber and they start multiplying. Just breeding a bunch of eggs and hoping that you use them up before they hatch is probably a recipe for disaster. Now, just take a wild guess, do I have an overly complicated solution for this? Of course I do. And afterwards I'll show you a more simple solution. The blueprint I made consists of chunks like this. It's a mirror design, so I'll start by removing half of it. The biochamber on the bottom is breeding the eggs. I want this biochamber to only ever contain one egg. To achieve this, I have the biochamber output the signal G every time it finishes a cycle. This inserter will grab a single egg from the output chest when it reads the signal G. It gets sent down the belt to this inserter, which checks that there are no eggs in the biochamber. The only reason for it checking that there's no eggs is that it's sharing the belt with another biochamber. This saves one tile of space on each side. Next up is the output chest and the decider combinators, which are responsible for making sure the eggs are fresh. They do this using a simple set-reset latch that I'll explain briefly. The first two combinators is reading the contents of the chest, checking two different things. The first one checks if the number of eggs is less than 20, and if it is, sends a reset signal. The second one checks if the number of eggs is more than or equal to 40, and if it is, sends a set signal. They send this information to the third combinator, which is responsible for setting and resetting the latch. If the value of the set signal is greater than the reset signal, it outputs the set signal. And thanks to this green loopback wire, it'll keep outputting the set signal to itself until it receives the reset signal. And this means very simply that if there's ever more than 40 eggs in the chest, it'll start outputting a set signal until there's less than 20 eggs in the chest. This inserter on the side is checking for the set signal, and if the set signal is there, it'll start purging eggs, starting with the most spoiled ones. It'll keep doing this until there's less than 20 eggs and the latch resets. This ensures that the eggs in the chest are fresh, and if we overproduce, we don't get so many eggs that they will eventually hatch. The eggs that get purged from the chest will get a last sightseeing trip before they get, purged from Gleb.
Are we the baddies?
Just to be absolutely certain no pentapods escape, I put up some turrets, just in case. And if you would like to see the very simple solution, just put all the eggs on the belt, and if they ever reach the end of the belt, there's an inserter that chucks them in the furnace. I feel reasonably certain that this is secure now, so it's about time I start sending the science packs back home. I made another copy of my space platform, but honestly, it's really not designed for this work. it makes fuel way too slowly to actually be efficient at its job. So I am going to make a new platform, but with the new science packs there are a few researches that are very useful for making the new one. So this one will have to do for a few trips, and then I'll research a bit and replace it. Introducing the new science packs to our labs, of course, brings our good friend spoilage with it. I'm not worried about our science setup looking good at the moment since it's temporary anyway. We aren't too far off from researching a new lab that's more efficient and faster. As a reminder, the freshness of the new science packs isn't just a binary thing. The science value scales with the freshness, so making a new platform that can make frequent and very fast trips is very beneficial for this type of science pack. And just a few hours later, I finally started research. I could have started it right away, but I was having a bad day with a pretty horrible migraine, so I just played a bit and then started research and left this responsibility to future me. And future me was like, yeah, sure, no problem, I'm just going to forget to record for a few hours. Which means that I lost the footage of absolutely nothing, to be honest. Future me is incredibly unreliable and did none of the things I was supposed to do. But at least I'm doing something with the new technologies I've researched, like building the rocket turrets on Gleb so I can defend against the Pentapods. I also started implementing stack inserters. I absolutely love these inserters. They can stack up to 4 of the same resource on top of each other, potentially quadrupling your throughput. This is very useful for breeding the Pentapod eggs since they need a lot of nutrients. And now it's finally going to happen. And the background music is going to change for surely no reason at all. You know, when I hear this music, I'm reminded of a story that I'd really like to tell. Way back in the year of 1998, me and my siblings were on a vacation to my aunt. And where my aunt lived, I also had a friend who had an older brother who was very into computers. This means that I had a bunch of computers and also usually the newest games. And in the year of 1998, this of course meant StarCraft. And to put it mildly, I liked this game a lot. Unfortunately, I wasn't very old at the time, so I didn't actually learn the name of this game. And vacation ended, I went home and just kinda accepted that I would never see this game again. But later that year, something truly special happened. I got a Christmas gift from my friend's older brother. This was the first and only time I'd ever received a gift from him. And as you probably guessed, it was StarCraft. It wasn't an original disc, however, it was just a burned copy. I was very excited to finally play the game again. And the game installed with no problems. The CD key included was very easy to remember, and I actually still use it whenever I install StarCraft. So I started the game, and I really wanted to play Zerg, but I figured I might as well start at the beginning and play Terran first. So I started the first mission, and it immediately crashed the desktop. And that kept happening every single time I started the mission. So I figured, okay, I'll try to play Zerg. And the first mission actually started. I played for a few minutes, happily building my base, and then after a few minutes I get a message and they tell me about some enemies on the map, and then the game immediately crashes the desktop. This happened every single time. And then I tried playing the Protest campaign, and that actually worked. I could play mission 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but then in mission 7 you're exploring a Terran compound that's been overrun by Zerg. And the mission would play fine, except if you walked to the wrong area, the game would suddenly crash the desktop immediately. Do you see a pattern here? So I'm just going to tell you what's going on here. When the disk got burned, it didn't actually become a perfect copy, it actually got a tiny corruption at a very unfortunate place. So what exactly got corrupted? Well, it was the sprite for the Terran Marine. So if at any point that unit was visible on the map, the game would try to load its graphics and crash. This is without a doubt one of the greatest tragedies of my life. And I once woke up from surgery and got told that I have stage 4 lymphoma, so I know a good tragedy. I'm not saying that it was as bad as that, but I'm also not saying that the difference is that big. At the end of the day, I guess I could still play the game, I just had to play skirmish mode and never against Terran. If you are familiar with StarCraft, you've probably already noticed that I'm building a battlecruiser. The most difficult part so far has without a doubt been trying to figure out how to set up my crushers. This is just a classic case of me overcomplicating things. First of all, I wanted the crushers to automatically set what they're crushing to what I need the most. And secondly, for some reason I really wanted to use the stack inserters to remove items from the crushers afterwards, which is it's just not worth it. I'll go into why this is a bad idea later. The reasons why I struggled with the first part of getting the crushers to crush what I needed the most is that I thought I needed to set the recipes by sending the actual recipe to the building to get them to do that specific thing. But it turns out that if you send the resulting item from the recipe to the building, it will actually just find the recipe that makes that item and set the recipe accordingly. You can see in the background footage now that when I'm switching the item signal I'm sending to the building, it's switching to a recipe that makes that item. So this part ended up being a lot simpler than I actually thought it would be. It's a shame it took me a couple of hours of fumbling around with combinators before I discovered this. So I've loaded up a recent save to check how this circuit works, and I'm not really sure how it works anymore. It's supposed to grab resources I need from the main storage and sort them so I know which resource I need to make. Unfortunately, my brain isn't having a very good day. Actually, never mind, while recording the voiceover I think I actually understood it. It's a pretty simple circuit actually, but it does still have some leftover combinators from when I was experimenting. The entire circuit is basically just these three combinators. This first combinator outputs the upper limit of each resource we want the crushers to produce. And on the other wire we have another constant combinator and the main storage outputting how many we have of each resource. It might seem a bit strange to have a constant combinator here just outputting one of each resource we need, but I'll explain that in a moment. The deciding combinator will now take each resource from the main storage on the red wire and compare that to the upper limit defined by the green wire. And if any of the resources on the red wire is less than it is on the green wire, then it will output that to the next step. And this is actually the reason why we needed that extra combinator that outputs one of each resource. Because if a resource is 0, it basically doesn't exist to the combinator. So if the main storage ever ran out of a certain resource, for example iron ore, then understandably you might think that iron ore is 0, so of course it's going to output that. But of course it can't output a signal that doesn't exist, and it can't even compare to a signal that doesn't exist. So that's why I add one to each of these resources, so I can always do the comparison no matter what. After doing the comparison, each resource that is less than the upper limit will get sent onwards to the select combinator, which sorts them by value and then outputs the lowest one. And as for how I control how many asteroid chunks there are in the belt, that's explained in a previous episode. This ship is just about ready to fly now, it just needs to get ammo to all the turrets. When comparing this platform to the early ones I've been using, the differences are really just the recipes that the chemical plants and crushers are using. We have researched a new way of making fuel that needs calcite, but it's much quicker. We didn't really have access to calcite earlier, but with our new research we can now get them from asteroid chunks. It's going to take a while to build up our calcite reserves, but once we do, this platform will be able to run at full speed constantly. You may have noticed the large open space on the left here. That's intentionally left open because later we will encounter larger asteroids and we will need rockets to destroy them. I'd say I'm pretty much done building the platform for now. I just need to park it somewhere in space where it's more likely to encounter the right type of asteroids so I can build up my calcite reserves. And while it's doing that, I'm going to turn my attention to all the other types of science packs we need. After all, there's no point in optimizing all these agricultural science packs if we don't have all the other science packs we need to actually do research. Increasing your science output is a very simple matter when you've taken the time to make some proper blueprints. And since my new research has allowed me to create even higher quality items, I also need to check all the places that create higher quality items and make sure they aren't stuck. I guess I should quickly go over what the new things we have access to with the new research are. First off, we have carbon fiber. It isn't used for a whole lot yet, but those things you can make are pretty useful. For example, we can use it to make the new rocket turrets and stack inserters. Stack inserters are incredibly useful in their ability to dump items onto belts very quickly and compactly, but they do unfortunately have a big flaw, and that's the fact that they will keep grabbing items until they fill their capacity. So if they can't find enough items to fill their capacity, they simply won't drop them off. This can easily cause them to get stuck in a number of scenarios. I did manage to find a workaround for this. I can use the deciding combinator to read what it's holding, and if it's holding nothing, I pass through a signal, setting its stack size to maximum, allowing it to grab as much as possible. And then if it's holding anything, I stop that signal, setting its maximum stack size to 1, immediately causing it to drop it off. The rocket turrets are actually very good, but it's difficult to find footage of them working. The damage output on Gleb is pretty high, so by the time I notice something's happening, it's already over. I was a bit annoyed that I couldn't actually find any good footage, so I decided to go into the game and put down some turrets and maybe spawn some in and maybe get to see them shooting that way. And like not even 5 seconds later this guy just shows up. This wasn't the greatest shot, but at least it shows off why it's so difficult to get footage of it happening. That guy had 15,000 health and he barely showed up on screen at all. We have also unlocked the ability to use agricultural towers back on Navis, but you can only use them to grow normal trees, so I'm not sure I see the point really. I guess you can use this infinite source of wood to get high quality wood for the few things that actually use them. And I guess you can put them along the border of your factory to help with the biter attacks if that's a problem at this stage of the game. We've also gotten access to 6 different repeatable technologies, which are a productivity bonus for plastic and rocket fuel production, and also a productivity bonus for your asteroid crushers, extra damage for rockets and flamethrowers, and extra health. I immediately thought that extra health would help me survive nuclear mishaps. The answer is yes, but also no. It turns out increasing my health isn't enough when I've more than quadrupled the damage of my missiles. There are a few more technologies to talk about, but I want to go back to Naois first before I talk about them. But the situation on Gleb is a bit volatile, so I'm not really comfortable leaving it alone just yet. But luckily we actually have researched something new that will help with this problem. If we make a few Spidertrons and import them to Gleb, we can use them to defend and build a factory if we ever need to. You can control them remotely and do most of the things you'd normally have to be there in person to do. And as you can see, I did actually get an achievement for this because this is the first time I've actually ever built one. Which is kinda weird since I've always been a bit fond of robots and especially the spider-like ones. An interesting fact here is that when you launch yourself into space, you can't bring any items with you, but you can keep wearing your armor and your weapons, just no items. So if there's any items in your equipment grid, you get to bring those with you. I wasn't sure if this was the case with Spidertron, so I decided to test it out. The biggest challenge here is getting the correct Spidertrons loaded into the rockets, but setting up a storage chest with a Spidertron filter seems to do the trick. So, did the trick of loading up the equipment grid first work? Well, as you can see, the equipment grid is empty. But for some reason I have all the items in my inventory now. So what's happened here is that it does actually work, but when you place down a Spidertron as a blueprint, it's a blueprint without any items in the equipment grid. So what happens is that it takes the Spidertron with the items in the equipment grid, puts it down and then sees, oh wait, this Spidertron has items in the equipment grid, it shouldn't have that, and removes them. The alternatives here is making a blueprint of the Spidertron with the items in the equipment grid, or placing them down by hand. Now that I have the Spidertrons in place, I'm reasonably sure that the planet is in safe legs. Or maybe it's safe mandibles? I'm not entirely sure what's correct, but I'm pretty sure it's not hands. It's finally time for me to go back home. And while I'm waiting to get back home, I can have some fun with my new Spidertrons. Now that I'm back home, the first thing I want to do is upgrade my equipment a bit. There's after all no such thing as too much speed. Or if there is, I've not gotten anywhere near close to it. I'm going to need this speed, considering my next project is pretty far away from the main base. This island right here is the one I nuked at the end of the last episode. I apparently didn't get all of them, and they've repopulated while I was on location. But that's kinda perfect really, because what I'm looking for right now is biter nests in an isolated location. I just need to find a way to get rid of the biters without destroying the nests. And what I'm doing right now just isn't working really. I need an approach that's a bit more surgical. Using the target priority system on the turrets, I can set a whitelist for what I want them to actually shoot. And now I can make these into a blueprint and just slap them down all over the island. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. And now it's time to show off another of our Gleb acquisitions. These new capture bots you can attach to biter nests, which will render them docile as long as you remember to feed them. But they're not going to eat anything, of course, they will only eat bioflux. And in return for the bioflux, they will supply me with eggs. You know, I often think when I'm playing Factorio, is what I'm doing evil? And I'm just going to go out and take a hard stance on a clear maybe. On one side, it does kinda seem evil, But then again, it's not really dissimilar from what humans are already doing with animals. So I'm just going to say that the engineer we're playing in Factorio is just a victim of his human nature. Very much like how the biters is victim of our human nature. The biter eggs are just as expected, just as annoying as the Pentapod eggs. So just to avoid drama, I'll just chuck off them in the furnace until I'm ready to use them. If you haven't played Factorio before, you might wonder what I could possibly need these eggs for. And they have a surprising number of uses really. If I ship them back to Gleb, I can use them to make overgrowth soil. This overgrowth soil can be used to expand the previously limited areas where I can grow crops. On Navis, they are one of the main ingredients in the level 3 production modules. And the eggs are also one of the very few ways you can get nutrients locally on Navis. Though I'm not really sure if it's fair to say that you get them locally since you have to import bioflux to make them. And making nutrients from them is one way to get spoilage, which you actually need to make level 3 efficiency modules. And lastly, but certainly not least, you can make the new biolabs. But my very first goal with these are making nutrients because I want to breed fish. And there's a good reason for this really. In the last episode I made a wrongful claim. Here's another sad fact of life if you're living on Navis. If you're a fish and get lifted out of water, you can never return. The water physically rejects you. This isn't true at all. You can put them back in water, but only in multiples of 5, giving you 1 fish. So apparently fish consists of 5 parts.
But you ain't got no legs, Lieutenant Dan.
So the reason why Lieutenant Dan couldn't go back in the water is because I ate his legs. It's only fair that I make this up to him and give him some new legs. To achieve this, we're going to need a few things. We're going to need a lot of nutrients, a lot of fish, and some hefty suspenders. You see, after what I did to Lieutenant Dan, he deserves the best legs. So I'm going to need to make an epic quality fish. Why? Well, if you know, you know. You'll see soon anyway. And as for the suspenders, well, let's just say your disbelief is going to need some hefty suspending. So here's the difficult part of making a fish with epic quality. You're not able to use quality modules when breeding the fish. So this only leaves you with the option of making a lot of fish and putting them into a recycler with quality modules, and hoping that they make it out to the other side and hopefully at higher quality. This alone isn't really going to net you any epic quality fish anytime soon. So what I'm going to do is breed fish, recycle them until I get enough fish of a higher quality, breed those, hopefully get fish that's another quality higher, breed those, and so on. The unfortunate part here is that breeding fish needs nutrients. This means that if you want to breed fish of a higher quality, you need nutrients of the same quality. And I'm getting nutrients from biter eggs, which face the same problem. I cannot use quality modules on those either, so my only option is to chuck them into the grinder and hope that they come out better quality. And this whole operation works, well, honestly, not very well at all. But eventually I do get lucky. And now for the most difficult part of this operation. You see, before I had even started recording this episode, I had already planned this. The plan, however, lacked a lot of planning, so I just brought his fish with me. So I just gave him a goodly home and forgot about him for a few dozen hours. And the home I gave him was apparently much too good. So good in fact that when I finally remembered to check back on him, he had gotten absolutely spoiled. Just turned into an absolute brat. And this is where we're going to need those suspenders. Wow, those suspenders really do work, don't they? Dan has really learned from his mistakes and became a better fish than he has ever been before. Now it's time to give him a new home. A much better home, one with legs. For you see, when you make a Spidertron, you need a fish. Why do we need a fish? Well, you see, developing artificial intelligence is pretty expensive, and even then it doesn't really work that well. So using a fish head should yield the same results really. So let's just do it.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. We have the capability. Better than he was before. Better, stronger, faster.
All in all, turned out really well. I'm planning to make a lot more Spidertrons, so I should name him and give him a distinctive color. So what do I get in return for all the effort it took to make him this high quality? We get almost double the health and inventory space, but most importantly, the equipment grid is also almost twice as big. This means we can make Dan really fast. He's not that fast yet, we still have to make all those exoskeletons, but one day he will be. He is pretty good at destroying biters, but honestly I think there are better ways. Can load him up with nukes of course, but still then I think there are cheaper ways of achieving the same goal. Probably the best use for a high quality Spidertron like this is just as a personal vehicle for constructing a factory. Unfortunately he can't fly, but you can easily remedy that with just putting down some stepping stones. If you're craving Spidertron based violence, I would suggest going with quantity. With just 11 of them I can achieve quite a lot. But what if we had more? That's pretty good, but it sure makes you think like, what if we had more? I would say that quantity is probably the best approach here. And this was a lot faster and a lot easier than using those bots. And by the end of it I had secured quite a bit of land. It's a lot more than I need, to be honest. I may have gotten a bit carried away. Not really sure what I'm going to do with it. Maybe I should use all this space to plant a bunch of trees and see if I can go to a heating tower based power supply. This video has been going on for way too long already, so I guess I should just round everything off with updating my science. There we go. There isn't really much to talk about here, they're just like normal science labs, except they're faster and they use less science packs. It's a really big upgrade, don't get me wrong, but there isn't really much to talk about. And I guess I should mention something else, which is that I was kinda expecting to have this video finished in less than 2 months. And the reason for why it took so much longer than expected is, well, turns out that winter is a lot more exhausting than I realized. I guess I really didn't notice this before because I'm usually exhausted all the time, so what's the difference really? Turns out the difference is actually pretty big because the weather has been getting warmer and almost half of the work has been done in just the last 3 weeks. And probably one of the biggest reasons why I have noticed that winter is so exhausting is probably because of my wife, who is so kind and supporting. I'm hard pressed to think of anyone who is deserving of such kindness in their lives. She even watches all my videos. Now that's dedication. Now it's time to end this by letting the train choose where we go next. Yes, I know that this isn't terribly exciting at this point, but still, it kind of feels right, you know. Oh, it's Vulcanus. Yay. Well, if you watched all the way to the end, I hope that means you actually enjoyed the video. If you did, you can help me out, you know, by doing all the usual things. You can even leave a comment if you want, you know, feel free to backseat and all that stuff. Or you can leave a nice message for my wife to read. So I think that's just about it really. I have a train to catch.